Hi, I'm Rachel. I thought family gatherings meant laughter, connection, and safety. Instead, at my daughter's 5th birthday party, I walked into the bathroom and found clumps of her beautiful copper curls scattered across the tile floor like fallen autumn leaves. My sister stood there with scissors in hand, grinning like she'd just pulled off the prank of the century. "It's just hair," she said with a shrug. "It'll grow back. Relax." Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. But it wasn't just hair. It was trust. It was boundaries. It was the moment I realized that some people don't see your child as a person. They see them as a prop for their entertainment. And when I finally said enough, my entire family turned on me like I was the villain for refusing to laugh along. Because sometimes protecting your child means losing everyone else. And that's a price I'd pay 1,000 times over. The afternoon sun filtered through the sheer curtains of my living room, casting soft golden patterns across the hardwood floors. It was one of those perfect late spring days in Maplewood, Oregon, where the air smelled like fresh cut grass and blooming lilacs, and everything felt light and possible. I had spent the entire morning decorating for Emma's 5th birthday party. Purple streamers twisted down from the ceiling fan. A banner spelling out her name in glittery letters hung crooked above the couch because Emma had insisted on helping me tape it up herself. The dining table was covered with mismatched plates, juice boxes, and a homemade vanilla cake with buttercream frosting that had taken me 3 tries to get right. Emma had been buzzing with excitement all week. She'd picked out her own dress, a lavender tulle number with tiny white daisies embroidered along the hem, and she'd spent an hour that morning letting me braid her hair. Her hair was her pride and joy, long copper waves that cascaded past her shoulders, catching the light in a way that made her look like something out of a storybook. She loved brushing it, twirling it, letting it fan out behind her when she ran through the yard. It was more than just hair to her. It was part of who she was. The guests started arriving around too. My mother came first, arms loaded with gift bags and a casserole dish she insisted we'd need even though I'd told her 3 times I had plenty of food. My father trailed behind her, quieter as always, offering me a small smile and a squeeze on the shoulder before settling into his usual spot on the couch. Then came my older brother, Marcus, with his wife, Jen, and their twin boys who immediately bolted for the backyard where I'd set up a small inflatable slide. And then there was my sister, Claire. She arrived late, as she always did, breezing through the front door with a dramatic sigh and an oversized designer bag slung over one shoulder. Claire was 32, 3 years older than me, and she'd spent most of our lives reminding me of that gap in every possible way. She was louder, bolder, more confident. She had opinions about everything and delivered them with the kind of certainty that made you question your own judgment even when you knew you were right. Growing up, she'd been the golden child, the one who could do no wrong, while I'd been the quiet, anxious one who never quite measured up. Claire dropped her bag on the kitchen counter and pulled me into a quick, perfunctory hug that smelled like expensive perfume and wine. She glanced around the room, taking in the homemade decorations with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Cute," she said, her tone hovering somewhere between genuine and patronizing. "Very Pinterest." I forced a smile and handed her a glass of lemonade. "Emma's thrilled you're here." Claire's gaze shifted to where Emma stood near the cake table, carefully adjusting the candles with the kind of focused intensity only a 5-year-old could muster. "Oh, look at her," Claire cooed, but there was something in her voice that made my shoulders tense. "She's getting so big. And that hair. God, Rachel, do you ever cut it?" It was an offhand comment, the kind Claire had been making my entire life, but something about it lodged under my skin like a splinter. "I cut it when it needs cutting," I said evenly. "She likes it long." Claire shrugged, taking a sip of her drink. "If you say so." The party unfolded in the easy, chaotic rhythm of a child's birthday. Kids ran in and out of the house, their laughter echoing off the walls. Emma opened presents with wide-eyed wonder, hugging each gift to her chest like it was the most precious thing she'd ever received. We sang Happy Birthday, Emma's face glowing in the candlelight as she made a wish and blew out the flames in one triumphant breath. For a while, everything felt exactly as it should. Then Emma disappeared. At first, I didn't think much of it. Kids wandered off during parties. They hid under tables, played in closets, snuck extra cookies when they thought no one was looking. But after 10 minutes, I started scanning the room, my chest tightening with that low hum of maternal anxiety that never fully goes away. I checked the backyard. The playroom. The garage. She wasn't anywhere. "Mom, where's Emma?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. My mother glanced up from the couch where she'd been chatting with Jen. "Oh, I think Claire took her inside a little bit ago. Maybe they're in the bathroom?" The bathroom. I walked down the hallway, my footsteps muffled by the old runner carpet we'd inherited from the previous owners. The bathroom door was closed, a sliver of light visible beneath it. I could hear voices inside. Claire's low and playful. Emma's higher, uncertain. I knocked lightly. "Emma? You okay, sweetheart?" There was a pause. Then Claire's voice, bright and breezy. "We're fine. Just a sec." Something in her tone made my pulse quicken. I turned the handle and pushed the door open. The first thing I saw was Emma's face. She was standing on the step stool we kept by the sink, staring at her reflection in the mirror with wide, confused eyes. Her hands were clutched together in front of her chest, and her lower lip was trembling in that way it did right before she started to cry. The second thing I saw was her hair. Or what was left of it. Jagged chunks had been hacked off, uneven and brutal, leaving her beautiful copper waves in a choppy, lopsided mess that barely reached her shoulders on one side and grazed her jawline on the other. The floor around the sink was littered with curls, soft spirals of red gold hair scattered across the tile like evidence at a crime scene. And there, leaning casually against the counter with a pair of kitchen scissors still dangling from her fingers, was Claire. She looked up at me with a grin, completely unbothered, like she'd just rearranged the furniture instead of cutting off my daughter's hair without permission. "Surprise," she said, her voice lilting with false cheer. "I gave her a little makeover. She'll love it once she gets used to it." I couldn't move. Couldn't speak. My brain was struggling to catch up with what I was seeing, trying to reconcile the image of my sister holding scissors with the reality of my daughter's destroyed hair. Emma turned to look at me, her eyes brimming with tears, and whispered, "Mommy, I didn't want her to." The air in the bathroom felt thick, suffocating. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears, a dull roar that drowned out everything else. My hands were shaking, but I forced them still as I knelt down beside Emma, brushing my fingers gently against what remained of her curls. "What did you do?" My voice came out low, barely above a whisper, but it was sharp enough to cut. Claire rolled her eyes, setting the scissors on the counter with a careless clatter. "Oh, come on, Rachel. It's not that big of a deal. It's just hair. It'll grow back." She was starting to look like a little ragamuffin anyway. I thought I'd help. Help. The word tasted bitter in my mouth. Emma's small hand found mine, gripping tight, and I could feel her trembling. "Mommy," she whispered again, and this time her voice cracked. I stood slowly, my gaze never leaving Claire's face. "You cut my daughter's hair. Without asking me. Without asking her." Claire's smile faltered for just a second, but then she laughed, a short, dismissive sound. "God, you're so dramatic. It was just a joke. A fun and thing. Lighten up. A joke." I felt something inside me go very still, very cold. This wasn't the first time Claire had overstepped. There had been other moments over the years, smaller infractions that I'd brushed off because that's what you did with family. You forgave. You moved on. You didn't make waves. But this wasn't a boundary crossed. This was a boundary obliterated. "Get out," I said quietly. Claire blinked. "What?" "Get out of my house." Her expression shifted, confusion giving way to indignation. "Are you serious right now? You're going to throw a fit over a haircut?" I stepped forward, putting myself between Claire and Emma. My daughter is crying. She told you she didn't want this, and you did it anyway. So yes, I'm serious. Get out. For a moment, Claire just stared at me, her mouth slightly open like she couldn't quite believe what she was hearing. Then she grabbed her bag from the counter and shouldered past me, muttering something under her breath about me being uptight and ridiculous. She didn't apologize. She didn't even look back at Emma. I heard her footsteps echo down the hallway, heard the front door slam, and then the house went quiet except for Emma's soft, hiccuping sobs. I scooped her up into my arms, holding her close as she buried her face in my shoulder, her small body shaking. "It's okay, baby," I whispered into her hair, what was left of it. "It's okay. I've got you." But even as I said it, I knew nothing about this was okay. The party continued in muted tones after that. I carried Emma out of the bathroom, her arms wrapped tightly around my neck, and the moment we stepped into the living room, every conversation stopped. My mother looked up from the couch, her face going pale. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Marcus stood frozen near the kitchen, a juice box halfway to his mouth. Jen gasped, one hand flying to cover her mouth. "What happened?" my mother asked, standing abruptly. I didn't answer. I just held Emma closer, feeling the eyes of everyone in the room on us. My father moved toward us, his brow furrowed in concern, but I shook my head. "Not now." I took Emma upstairs to her bedroom, away from the stairs and whispers, and sat with her on the edge of her bed. She wouldn't let go of me, her fingers twisted in my shirt, her breath coming in shallow gasps. I stroked her back, whispering reassurances I wasn't sure I believed. Eventually, her breathing slowed, and she pulled back just enough to look at me with red-rimmed eyes. "Why did Aunt Claire do that?" she asked, her voice small and broken. "I don't know, sweetheart," I said honestly. "But it wasn't okay. And I'm going to make sure it doesn't happen again." She nodded, wiping at her eyes with the back of her hand. "Can we fix it?" I glanced at the uneven chunks of hair framing her face and felt my chest tighten. "We'll go see someone who can make it look nice," I promised. "Someone who knows what they're doing." She seemed to accept that, leaning back against me with a tired sigh. Downstairs, I could still hear voices, low and urgent, and I knew the family was talking about what had just happened. Part of me wanted to go down there and defend myself, to explain why I'd reacted the way I had. But a larger part of me didn't care what they thought. My only priority was the little girl in my arms. After a while, Emma drifted off to sleep, exhausted from crying. I tucked her under her blankets, smoothing the covers around her shoulders, and pressed a kiss to her forehead. Then I stood, steeling myself, and headed back downstairs. The living room had emptied out. Most of the guests had left, taking their kids and their half-eaten plates of cake with them. Only my parents and Marcus remained, standing in a tight cluster near the kitchen. They looked up when I entered, and the tension in the room was immediate and suffocating. "Rachel," my mother started, her voice careful. "We need to talk about what just happened." I crossed my arms, leaning against the doorway. "What's there to talk about?" My mother exchanged a glance with my father, then sighed. "Claire called me. She's very upset." "She's upset?" The words came out sharper than I intended. "Mom, she cut Emma's hair without permission. Emma was crying. She told Claire no, and Claire did it anyway." "I know, sweetheart, but," my mother hesitated, wringing her hands. "Claire said it was just meant to be playful. She didn't think you'd react so strongly." Playful. There was that word again, as if calling something playful somehow absolved it of harm. Marcus cleared his throat, stepping forward. "Look, Ratch, I get that you're upset. But kicking Claire out like that, in front of everyone, it was pretty harsh. She's your sister. And Emma's my daughter," I shot back. "She comes first. Always." My father, who had been silent up until now, finally spoke. No one's saying Emma doesn't come first. But family is family. Maybe you could have handled it differently. The words hit me like a slap. I stared at him, at all of them, and realized with a sinking feeling that they weren't here to support me. They were here to manage the situation. To smooth things over. To make sure Claire wasn't too hurt by my reaction. So what are you asking me to do? I said slowly. Apologize? My mother's face softened. Maybe just talk to her. Let her know you understand it was a mistake. A mistake. As if cutting off a child's hair against her will was something that could be chalked up to an accident. I shook my head, feeling something harden inside me. No. I'm not apologizing. Claire crossed a line, and if she can't see that, that's her problem. Not mine. The room went silent. My mother looked like she wanted to say something more, but my father put a hand on her shoulder, stopping her. Marcus just shook his head, disappointed, like I was the unreasonable one. Fine, my mother said quietly. But don't be surprised if this causes problems. They left soon after, the door closing behind them with a soft click that felt far too final. I stood alone in my living room, surrounded by the remnants of a birthday party that had started with so much hope and ended in ruins. Purple streamers hung limply from the ceiling. Half-eaten slices of cake sat abandoned on paper plates. And upstairs, my daughter slept with a haircut she never wanted, given to her by someone who was supposed to love her. I sank onto the couch, burying my face in my hands. The silence pressed in around me, heavy and accusing. Part of me wondered if I'd overreacted. If I should have laughed it off, let it go, kept the peace. But then I thought of Emma's face in that bathroom, the confusion and hurt in her eyes, and I knew I'd made the right choice. Some things weren't worth keeping the peace over. Some lines, once crossed, couldn't be uncrossed. And if standing up for my daughter meant standing alone, then so be it. I picked up my phone, staring at the screen for a long moment. Then I opened my photos and scrolled back to this morning, to the picture I'd taken of Emma before the party. She was grinning at the camera, her copper curls spilling over her shoulders, her eyes bright with excitement. I saved the photo, then opened a new note and began typing. A record. Evidence. A timeline of what had happened and when. Because something told me this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The following morning arrived with an oppressive gray sky that matched my mood perfectly. I woke to Emma crawling into bed beside me, her small body curling against mine like she used to do when she was a toddler afraid of thunderstorms. Her hair, what remained of it, was tangled and sticking up at odd angles, a cruel reminder of yesterday's violation. She didn't say anything at first, just pressed her face into my shoulder and breathed quietly. We lay there together as weak sunlight filtered through the bedroom curtains, neither of us ready to face the day. Eventually, Emma pulled back and touched the jagged ends of her hair, her fingers exploring the damage with the careful curiosity of someone examining a wound. It feels different, she said softly. I know, baby. I brushed a strand away from her face. How about we go get it fixed today? We can go to that salon on Oak Street, the one with the fish tank in the window. You always liked watching the fish. She considered this, then nodded slowly. Will they make it pretty again? The question broke something in me. They'll make it beautiful, I promised. Different than before, but beautiful. After breakfast, bland cereal that neither of us had much appetite for, I called the salon and explained the situation in vague terms. The receptionist, a kind-voiced woman named Diane, fit us in for 11 o'clock. I spent the next hour trying to distract Emma with cartoons while I checked my phone, dreading what I might find. I wasn't disappointed. 3 missed calls from my mother. 2 text messages from Marcus. And a long, rambling voicemail from Claire that I only listened to halfway through before deleting it. Her tone oscillated between defensive and wounded, painting herself as the victim of my overreaction. She used phrases like just trying to help and you've always been so sensitive and I don't understand why you're punishing me. Not once did she acknowledge Emma's feelings or apologize for what she'd done. I set the phone face down on the coffee table and focused on my daughter, who was sprawled on the rug with her favorite stuffed elephant, whispering secrets into its worn fabric ear. She looked so small, so fragile, and I felt a fierce surge of protectiveness that bordered on feral. No one was going to make her feel like her pain didn't matter. Not my sister. Not my parents. Not anyone. The salon visit went better than I'd expected. The stylist, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and steady hands, took one look at Emma's butchered hair and didn't ask questions. She just knelt down to Emma's level and said, "We're going to make you feel like a princess again, okay?" Emma nodded, climbing into the chair with cautious hope. I watched as the stylist worked, carefully evening out the cuts, shaping what remained into something intentional rather than destructive. She kept up a steady stream of gentle conversation, asking Emma about her favorite colors and animals and what she wanted to be when she grew up. By the time she finished, Emma's hair was styled into a cute pixie cut that actually suited her face, bringing out her eyes and the delicate shape of her jaw. Emma stared at her reflection in the mirror, tilting her head from side to side. "I look different," she said quietly. "Different good or different bad?" the stylist asked. Emma thought about it for a long moment. "Different, okay." It wasn't the enthusiastic approval I'd hoped for, but it was something. I paid the stylist and added a generous tip, thanking her for her kindness. As we walked back to the car, Emma slipped her hand into mine and squeezed. I squeezed back. That afternoon, I did something I'd been avoiding since the party ended. I sat down at my laptop and began compiling everything. I opened a fresh document and started typing out a detailed account of what had happened, starting from the moment Claire arrived at the party to the moment I'd sent her away. I included timestamps, direct quotes as best as I could remember them, and Emma's exact words when she'd told me she didn't want her hair cut. Then I went through my phone and found the photo I'd taken of Emma before the party, her long copper curls gleaming in the sunlight. I saved it to a folder along with the photo I'd taken this morning before we left for the salon, showing the uneven, hacked-off chunks. The contrast was damning. I wasn't sure yet what I would do with this documentation. Part of me felt ridiculous for being so thorough, like I was overreacting to something my family clearly thought was trivial. But another part of me, the part that had spent years smoothing over Claire's behavior and accepting my parents' excuses, knew better. This wasn't about a haircut. This was about a pattern of boundary violations that had been excused and enabled for as long as I could remember. My phone buzzed. Another text from Marcus. "Can we talk? This silent treatment isn't helping anyone." I stared at the message, feeling a familiar pressure building in my chest. The silent treatment. As if my decision to protect my space and my daughter was somehow an act of aggression rather than self-preservation. I started to type a response, then deleted it. Then started again. Finally, I just turned off my phone entirely and closed the laptop. Emma wandered into the kitchen where I was standing, staring blankly at the refrigerator. She tugged on my sleeve. "Mommy, can we make cookies?" It was such a simple request, so beautifully normal, that I felt tears prick at my eyes. "Of course we can, sweetheart." We spent the rest of the afternoon in the kitchen, measuring flour and sugar, cracking eggs, licking chocolate chips from our fingers. Emma stood on her step stool at the counter, her new short hair tucked behind her ears, carefully rolling dough into balls with the intense concentration only a child could muster. For a few hours, the world outside our kitchen didn't exist. There was only us, the warm smell of baking cookies, and the sound of Emma's laughter when she got flour on her nose. But that evening, after Emma had gone to bed clutching her stuffed elephant and a plate of cookies we'd saved just for her, reality came crashing back. I turned my phone back on and watched as notification after notification flooded the screen. More missed calls. More texts. And then, at the bottom of the list, a message from my mother that made my blood run cold. "Claire is really hurt, Rachel. She's talking about not coming to family events anymore if you're going to be there. We need to work this out before Thanksgiving. Your father's birthday is next month and I won't have this tension ruining everything. Please, just apologize and let's move past this." I read the message 3 times, each time feeling a different emotion rise and fall like a wave. First, disbelief that my mother was more concerned about holiday plans than her granddaughter's well-being. Then anger that I was being positioned as the problem that needed fixing. And finally, a cold, settled clarity. This wasn't going to get better. They weren't going to suddenly see my side. They were going to keep pushing, keep minimizing, keep trying to force me back into the role of the accommodating daughter who never made waves. And if I gave in now, if I apologized just to keep the peace, would be teaching Emma that her feelings didn't matter. That adults could violate her body and autonomy as long as they claimed it was just a joke. I couldn't do that. I wouldn't. I typed out a response, my fingers steady despite the way my heart was racing. Mom, I'm not apologizing. What Claire did was wrong, and the fact that you can't see that is deeply troubling to me. Emma comes first. Always. If that means skipping some family events, then that's what I'll do. I hit send before I could second-guess myself. Then I muted the conversation and set my phone aside. The next few days passed in a strange, suspended quiet. I took Emma to the park, to the library, to her favorite ice cream shop where she got 2 scoops of strawberry and wore most of it on her face. We existed in our own small bubble, just the 2 of us, and I tried to pretend that the growing rift with my family wasn't carving a hollow space in my chest. But the messages kept coming. Not from my mother anymore, she'd gone silent after my last text, but from other relatives. An aunt I barely spoke to sent me a long message about the importance of forgiveness. A cousin weighed in with her unsolicited opinion that I was being too harsh. Even my grandmother, who usually stayed out of family drama, called and gently suggested that maybe I was letting my emotions get the better of me. Each message felt like a small betrayal, a reminder that no one was interested in hearing my side or understanding why this mattered so much. They just wanted the conflict resolved, the discomfort smoothed over, everything back to the way it was before. Comfortable. Predictable. With me playing the role of the peacekeeper who never caused problems. I started avoiding my phone altogether, letting it sit untouched on the kitchen counter for hours at a time. Emma noticed, asking me once why I wasn't answering when it rang. I just told her I needed a break from talking to people, which was true enough. It was Thursday afternoon, almost a week after the party, when I heard a knock at the door. I wasn't expecting anyone, and for a moment I considered not answering. But then I heard my mother's voice calling through the door. Rachel, honey, I know you're in there. Please, let's just talk. I closed my eyes, taking a slow breath, then opened the door. My mother stood on the porch holding a casserole dish, her face drawn and tired. She looked older than I remembered, the lines around her eyes deeper, and I felt a pang of something that might have been guilt if I'd let it take root. Can I come in? She asked. I stepped aside, letting her pass. She set the casserole on the kitchen counter and turned to face me, wringing her hands in that nervous way she'd always had. Where's Emma? Upstairs playing in her room. My mother nodded, glancing toward the staircase as if she might catch a glimpse of her granddaughter. How is she doing? She's fine, I said flatly. Her hair is fixed. She's adjusting. Good. That's good. My mother paused, then sighed. Rachel, I came here because I'm worried about you. This thing with Claire, it's gotten out of hand. Out of hand. I felt my jaw tighten. Mom, she cut Emma's hair without permission. Against Emma's will. That's not out of hand. That's the actual hand. I know, and I'm not saying what Claire did was right. But you have to understand, she didn't mean any harm. She was just trying to be fun, to bond with Emma. She feels terrible that it upset you both so much. Feels terrible. Not is sorry. Not realizes she was wrong. Just feels terrible that we were upset, as if our reaction was the problem rather than her action. Did she say that? I asked quietly. Did Claire actually tell you she feels terrible? My mother hesitated, and in that hesitation I had my answer. Well, she's upset. I know she is. That's not the same thing, Mom. My mother's face hardened slightly, that subtle shift that happened whenever she was about to defend Claire. You know how your sister is. She's impulsive. She doesn't always think things through. But she loves Emma. She'd never intentionally hurt her. I stared at my mother, this woman who had raised me, who had kissed my scraped knees and read me bedtime stories and taught me how to braid hair. And I realized with a clarity that felt like glass breaking that she was never going to choose me. She was never going to prioritize my feelings or Emma's well-being over Claire's comfort. She had spent my entire childhood making excuses for Claire's behavior, smoothing over her mistakes, asking me to be the bigger person because Claire was sensitive, Claire was going through something, Claire just needed grace. I was 40 years old, and I was still being asked to make myself smaller so Claire could feel bigger. Mom, I said slowly, carefully. I need you to hear me. What Claire did wasn't impulsive. It wasn't a mistake. She deliberately cut Emma's hair after Emma told her no. That's not love. That's not bonding. That's a violation of my daughter's body and autonomy. And the fact that you're here defending her instead of supporting us tells me everything I need to know about where your priorities are. My mother's eyes widened. Rachel, that's not fair. Isn't it? When have you ever asked Claire to apologize to me? When have you ever told her she crossed a line and needed to make it right? You always ask me to be the understanding one. The flexible one. The one who forgives and moves on. Well, I'm done. I'm done protecting Claire from the consequences of her own actions. My mother's face crumpled slightly, hurt flashing across her features. So what are you saying? You're cutting us off? I'm saying that until Claire apologizes, directly and sincerely, to Emma, not to me, to Emma, I'm not interested in pretending everything is fine. And if you can't respect that boundary, then yes, we need some distance. The silence that followed was suffocating. My mother stood there, her mouth opening and closing like she was trying to find words that wouldn't come. Finally, she picked up her purse from where she'd set it on the counter and walked toward the door. When she reached it, she turned back, her eyes shining with unshed tears. I hope you realize what you're doing, she said quietly. Family is everything, Rachel. Once you push people away, it's hard to get them back. Then she left, the door closing softly behind her. I stood in my kitchen, surrounded by the remnants of normalcy, the casserole she'd brought still sitting on the counter, and felt the full weight of what I'd just done. I'd drawn a line. A real, unmistakable line. And there was no taking it back. Upstairs, I heard Emma's footsteps, light and quick, crossing her bedroom floor. I heard her humming a song from one of her cartoons. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that I'd made the right choice. Some bridges burned for a reason. And sometimes, the only way to protect the people you loved was to let the fire consume what couldn't be saved. The silence that followed my mother's departure stretched into days that felt both liberating and suffocating. I'd expected some kind of immediate fallout, angry phone calls or surprise visits, but instead there was nothing. Radio silence from my entire family. At first, I told myself it was what I wanted, space to breathe and heal without the constant pressure to reconcile. But as the days turned into a week, then two, the quiet started to feel less like peace and more like exile. Emma seemed to sense the shift without me saying anything. Children have that uncanny ability to pick up on tension even when you think you're hiding it well. She asked about Grandma twice, wondering when we'd visit again, and each time I gave her vague answers about everyone being busy. She accepted this with the easy trust of a 5-year-old, but I saw the questions forming behind her eyes, questions she was too young to articulate but old enough to feel. I threw myself into routine. Mornings were for getting Emma ready for kindergarten, packing her lunch with the crusts cut off her sandwiches just how she liked, walking her to the bus stop and waving until the yellow bulk disappeared around the corner. Days were for work, answering emails and attending video calls from my home office, trying to focus on spreadsheets and project timelines when my mind kept drifting to family dinners I wouldn't be attending and holidays that would look completely different now. Evenings belonged to Emma. We'd make dinner together, her standing on her step stool helping me stir pasta sauce or tear lettuce for salad. We'd eat at the kitchen table, just the two of us, and she'd tell me about her day in the breathless, tangential way children do, jumping from topic to topic with no clear through line. After dinner came bath time, story time, the sacred ritual of tucking her in with her stuffed elephant and the nightlight that projected stars across her ceiling. These rhythms kept me grounded, kept me from spiraling into doubt about whether I'd done the right thing. But late at night, after Emma was asleep and the house settled into that particular silence that only comes after dark, the questions would creep in. Had I overreacted? Was I depriving Emma of her extended family over something that, in the grand scheme of things, wasn't that serious? Would she resent me later for this choice I was making on her behalf? I'd pull out my laptop during those dark hours and reread the documentation I'd compiled. The photos of Emma's hair before and after. The timeline of events. The text messages from family members asking me to just let it go. And each time, I'd come back to the same conclusion. This wasn't about hair. It had never been about hair. It was about teaching my daughter that her body belonged to her, that she had the right to say no, and that the adults in her life should respect those boundaries even when it was inconvenient. 3 weeks after the birthday party, I got a text from an unknown number. It took me a moment to realize it was from Claire. She'd sent it from a different phone, probably assuming I'd blocked her original number, which I had. The message was long, a wall of text that I had to scroll through to read in its entirety. It started with accusations, claiming I was being dramatic and turning the family against her for no reason. It pivoted to self-pity, detailing how hurt she was that I'd kicked her out and refused to speak to her. Then came the justifications, explaining that she'd only been trying to help because Emma's hair was getting unmanageable and she thought a trim would be easier for me to deal with. And finally, buried near the end, was something that might have been an apology if you squinted. I'm sorry you got so upset. I never meant for things to blow up like this. I read it twice, feeling my stomach twist with familiar frustration. Even now, even after weeks of silence and clear boundaries, Claire couldn't bring herself to take actual responsibility. She was sorry I got upset. Not sorry for what she'd done. Not sorry for ignoring Emma's protests or violating her autonomy. Just sorry that I'd reacted badly to her perfectly reasonable actions. I didn't respond. I simply blocked the new number and deleted the message. But apparently Claire wasn't done trying to control the narrative. 2 days later, I started getting messages from people I barely knew, distant family members and old family friends I hadn't spoken to in years. They all had the same basic theme, asking if I was okay and mentioning that they'd heard there was some kind of misunderstanding at Emma's birthday party. The way they phrased it made it clear that Claire had been talking, spinning her version of events, painting herself as the wounded party and me as the unstable sister who'd exploded over nothing. I felt a hot rush of anger reading those messages, realizing that Claire was now trying to turn my own extended family against me. But beneath the anger was something colder and more calculated. If Claire wanted to make this public, to air our conflict in front of everyone, then I could do the same. And unlike her version, mine had evidence. I spent an evening carefully crafting a post. I didn't name Claire directly, didn't drag her through the mud or air every grievance I'd accumulated over the years. Instead, I simply stated facts. I explained what had happened at the party in clear, unemotional terms. I included the before and after photos of Emma's hair. I shared a quote from a child psychology article about bodily autonomy and why it mattered to respect children's boundaries. And I ended with a simple statement about how, as a parent, my job was to protect my daughter and teach her that her voice mattered, even when it was difficult or inconvenient for the adults around her. I posted it to my personal social media account, the one I rarely used for anything more than birthday wishes and vacation photos. Then I closed the app and tried not to think about it. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within an hour, I had dozens of comments, most of them supportive. Other mothers shared their own stories about family members who'd overstepped with their children, about haircuts and ear piercings and other violations done without permission. Some people who knew Claire commented carefully, saying things like I always wondered about her boundaries or this explains a lot. A few tried to play devil's advocate, suggesting that maybe it was all a misunderstanding, but they were quickly drowned out by the tide of support. What surprised me most were the messages from people I'd gone to high school with, former coworkers, even a few neighbors I'd only ever exchanged pleasantries with. They sent private messages thanking me for speaking up, sharing their own experiences of being pressured to forgive family members who'd hurt them, expressing relief that someone was finally saying it was okay to choose your own peace over family harmony. One message in particular stuck with me. It was from a woman named Beth who'd lived 3 houses down from us when I was growing up. I barely remembered her, just vague recollections of a kind face and a garden full of roses. She wrote, "I watched your mother make excuses for Claire your whole childhood. I always felt bad for you, always so quiet and trying so hard to keep everyone happy. I'm glad you're finally standing up for yourself and your daughter. She deserves a mother who protects her, not one who sacrifices her to keep the peace." I read that message 3 times, tears blurring my vision. It was validating in a way I hadn't expected, knowing that someone had seen what I'd experienced, that I wasn't imagining the dynamics that had shaped my entire life. But validation came with a cost. Within 24 hours of my post going up, my phone exploded with messages from my family. Marcus called me 6 times in a row, leaving increasingly angry voicemails about how I'd humiliated Claire publicly and made the whole family look bad. My mother sent a text that simply said, "How could you?" My father, who usually stayed out of conflicts, sent a terse message telling me I owed Claire an apology for defaming her character online. And Claire, predictably, lost her mind. She responded with her own post, a long, emotional screed about being attacked by her own sister, about how she'd only been trying to help and I'd twisted everything to make her look like a monster. She posted old photos of us as children, playing in the backyard and hugging at Christmas, using them as evidence of how close we used to be before I decided to destroy our relationship over a simple haircut. Her post got its own wave of support, mostly from people who'd known her longer than they'd known me, people who saw her as vivacious and fun and couldn't imagine her doing anything malicious. They left comments defending her, calling me vindictive and cruel, suggesting I was jealous of her or dealing with postpartum issues even though Emma was 5 years old. The court of public opinion was split, and I found myself at the center of a battlefield I'd never wanted to be on. I deactivated my social media accounts, unable to handle the constant notifications and the way every comment felt like a judgment on my worth as a person and a parent. But the damage was done. Lines had been drawn. People had chosen sides. And there was no going back to the way things were before. Emma's school called on a Tuesday afternoon. My stomach dropped the moment I saw the number on my caller ID, immediately thinking something terrible had happened. I answered on the second ring, my voice tight with worry. "This is Rachel." "Miss Harper, this is Principal Davis." "Emma's fine, she's not hurt, but we need you to come down to the school. There's been an incident." 15 minutes later, I was sitting in the principal's office, my hands clenched together in my lap. Emma sat beside me in a child-sized chair, her eyes red-rimmed and her face blotchy from crying. Across from us, Principal Davis sat behind her desk with a carefully neutral expression. "Can you tell me what happened?" I asked, looking between them. Principal Davis folded her hands on her desk. "There was an altercation during recess. Emma got into a physical confrontation with another student." My heart sank. Emma wasn't aggressive. She was gentle and sensitive, the kind of kid who cried when she accidentally stepped on an ant. "Emma, what happened?" She wouldn't look at me, just stared at her shoes and twisted her fingers together. The principal continued, her tone gentle but firm. "According to the playground monitor, a group of students were teasing Emma about her hair. One child apparently said something about her looking like a boy, and Emma pushed her. I felt a cold fury settle over me. She was being bullied about her hair. We don't tolerate bullying at this school, Ms. Harper, but we also don't tolerate physical violence. Emma knows she should have come to a teacher instead of reacting physically." I turned to Emma, reaching out to take her small hand in mine. "Baby, can you tell me what happened? In your own words?" Emma's lower lip trembled. She said Aunt Claire must not love me because she made me ugly. And everyone laughed. I just wanted her to stop. The words hit me like a punch to the chest. I looked at the principal, trying to keep my voice steady. What's being done about the children who were teasing her? We'll be speaking with them and their parents. But right now, we need to address Emma's behavior. She's receiving a warning, and we'd like you to work with her at home about appropriate ways to handle conflict. I nodded mechanically, barely hearing the rest of what she said. All I could think about was Emma standing on that playground, dealing with the fallout of something she hadn't chosen, being mocked for a violation someone else had committed against her. And then being punished for finally standing up for herself. We left the school in silence. Emma climbed into her car seat without protest, and I drove us home on autopilot, my mind racing. When we got inside, I knelt down in front of her, taking both her hands in mine. Emma, I'm not mad at you. Do you understand that? She nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. But I pushed Madison. I know. And pushing isn't okay, you're right. But those kids were being really mean to you, and I understand why you reacted the way you did. Your feelings were completely valid. She threw her arms around my neck, sobbing into my shoulder. I don't like my hair, Mommy. I want it back. I held her tight, my own tears finally breaking free. I know, sweetheart. I know. I'm so sorry this happened to you. We stayed like that for a long time, wrapped around each other on the living room floor. And as I held my daughter, feeling her small body shake with sobs, I felt something inside me crystallize into absolute certainty. I had been right to draw boundaries. Right to demand accountability. Right to refuse to sweep this under the rug for the sake of family peace. Because this moment right here, this was the cost of not standing up. This was what happened when adults taught children that their boundaries didn't matter, that they should just accept violations with a smile and move on. Emma was living with the consequences of Claire's actions every single day, facing mockery from her peers and confusion about why someone who supposedly loved her had hurt her this way. That evening, after Emma had cried herself to sleep clutching her stuffed elephant, I sat down and wrote an email. It was addressed to my entire family, everyone who'd been messaging me and calling and demanding that I fix this situation. I laid out everything that had happened since the birthday party. The haircut itself, Emma's immediate distress, my family's response that prioritized Claire's feelings over Emma's trauma. I included details about the school incident, about Emma being bullied because of something she hadn't chosen and didn't want. And I made it crystal clear that I would not be apologizing, would not be backing down, and would not be attending any family events until Claire took full responsibility for what she'd done and apologized directly to Emma. I ended the email with a simple statement. My daughter's well-being is not negotiable. If you can't respect that, then you're choosing not to have a relationship with us. That's your choice to make, but it's not one I'm going to beg you to reconsider. I hit send before I could second-guess myself, then closed my laptop and poured myself a glass of wine. I sat at my kitchen table in the quiet darkness, listening to the house settle around me, and waited for the fallout I knew was coming. It arrived the next morning in the form of a phone call from my father. His voice was tight with barely controlled anger. What you sent last night was completely out of line. You're tearing this family apart. I'm protecting my daughter, I replied calmly. If that's tearing the family apart, then maybe the family needed to be torn apart. He hung up on me. Marcus sent a single text. You're on your own. And my mother, the one I'd hoped might eventually understand, sent a final message that felt like a door closing. I tried to be there for you. I tried to help you see reason. But you're determined to be the victim in this situation. When you're ready to act like an adult and fix what you've broken, let me know. Until then, don't contact me. I read that message sitting on my back porch, watching Emma play in the yard. She was running in circles, her short hair bouncing, her laughter carrying on the autumn breeze. She looked free, unburdened by the adult conflicts swirling around her. And I realized that losing my family truly hurt in a deep, aching way that would probably never fully heal. But losing myself, teaching my daughter that her pain didn't matter, that would have been worse. That would have been unforgivable. So I let the relationships fracture. I let the silence stretch. And I focused on the one relationship that mattered most, the one between me and the little girl who trusted me to keep her safe even when it cost me everything else. October arrived with a vengeance, bringing cold rain that drummed against the windows and turned the world outside into various shades of gray. The trees lining our street began shedding their leaves in earnest, creating a carpet of amber and rust that Emma loved to kick through on our walks home from the bus stop. Life had settled into a new kind of normal, one without the constant pressure of family expectations but also without the safety net I'd taken for granted my entire life. Emma had mostly adjusted to her short hair, though I still caught her sometimes standing in front of the bathroom mirror with a wistful expression, touching the place where her long curls used to fall. The bullying at school had subsided after the principal spoke with the children involved and their parents, though Emma had become noticeably quieter, more withdrawn. She still played and laughed, but there was a carefulness to her now that hadn't been there before, as if she was constantly aware that the world could hurt her in unexpected ways. I'd started taking her to a child therapist, a warm woman named Dr. Patricia Chen who specialized in helping young children process trauma. At first, Emma had been resistant, clinging to my leg and refusing to go into the office alone. But Dr. Chen had a gentle persistence that eventually won her over, and now Emma actually looked forward to their weekly sessions where they played with dolls and drew pictures and talked about big feelings in small, manageable words. During one of our parent consultation sessions, Dr. Chen had looked at me with compassionate eyes and said something that had stayed with me for days afterward. Children are remarkably resilient, but they learn their boundaries from us. By standing firm in yours, you're teaching Emma that she's worth protecting. That's a gift that will serve her for the rest of her life. I'd cried in my car after that appointment, finally allowing myself to feel the weight of everything I'd been carrying. The isolation from my family. The constant second-guessing. The fear that I was damaging Emma by keeping her from her grandparents and extended relatives. But Dr. Chen's words had offered a perspective I desperately needed, that protection sometimes looked like loss, and that was okay. The first week of October brought an unexpected development. I was at the grocery store with Emma, letting her pick out apples and debating whether we needed more pasta, when I ran into Jen, Marcus's wife. We nearly collided at the end of the produce aisle, both of us pushing carts, and for a moment we just stared at each other in awkward surprise. "Rachel," Jen said, her voice uncertain. "Hi." "Hi," I replied, instinctively moving my cart to create a barrier between us and them. Emma peeked around my legs, curious but cautious. Jen glanced down at Emma, and I saw something shift in her expression, a softening around her eyes. "Your hair looks really cute, Emma. Very stylish." Emma mumbled a quiet thank you and pressed closer to me. I put a protective hand on her shoulder, ready to end this encounter and move on. But Jen didn't leave. She looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read, something between regret and determination. "Can we talk?" she asked. "Just for a minute?" I hesitated, every instinct telling me to decline, to protect myself from whatever judgment or pressure she was about to deliver. But there was something genuine in her face, something that made me pause. I looked down at Emma. "Sweetheart, can you go pick out a cereal? Stay where I can see you." Emma nodded and scampered off toward the cereal aisle, still within view but out of earshot. I turned back to Jen, crossing my arms. "What do you want to talk about?" Jen took a breath, gripping the handle of her cart like it was anchoring her. "I wanted to say I'm sorry. For how Marcus reacted. For how we all reacted, really. I've been thinking about what happened a lot, and the more I think about it, the more I realize you were right." I blinked, genuinely surprised. The apology was so unexpected that I didn't know how to respond. Jen continued, words tumbling out in a rush. "If someone had done that to one of my boys, if Claire had cut their hair without asking, I would have lost it. But because it was you, because you're always the one who's expected to be understanding and flexible, everyone just assumed you were overreacting. That's not fair. It was never fair." I felt a lump forming in my throat. "Thank you for saying that." "Marcus doesn't know I'm talking to you," Jen admitted. "He's still angry, still thinks you humiliated Claire for no reason. But I keep thinking about Emma's face at that party, how scared she looked, and I can't shake it. What Claire did was wrong. It doesn't matter if it was meant as a joke or if she thought she was helping. She hurt Emma, and nobody seems to care about that except you. I had to look away, blinking back tears. For weeks, I'd felt completely alone in my conviction that what happened mattered. Hearing someone else acknowledge it, validate it, felt like oxygen after holding my breath underwater. Does anyone else in the family feel this way? I asked quietly. Jen shook her head. Not that I know of. Your mom's still really hurt. She thinks you're being stubborn and unforgiving. Claire's playing the victim hard, posting sad quotes on social media about toxic family members and fake people. And Marcus, she sighed, he's stuck in the middle and dealing with it by just being angry at everyone. I nodded slowly, absorbing this information. It wasn't the reconciliation I might have hoped for, but it was something. It was one person seeing the truth and being willing to speak it, even at personal cost. Are you going to be in trouble for talking to me? Probably, Jen said with a wry smile. But I have 2 sons, and I need to be able to look at myself in the mirror. If I stayed silent about this, if I let you keep being villainized for protecting your daughter, what would that teach them about right and wrong? We talked for a few more minutes, carefully avoiding anything too heavy, just 2 women who'd once been family trying to find solid ground. Emma returned with a box of cereal covered in cartoon characters, and Jen complimented her choice with genuine warmth. As we parted ways, Jen reached out and squeezed my arm briefly. You're a good mom, Rachel. Don't let anyone make you doubt that. I watched her walk away, her cart squeaking slightly on the linoleum floor, and felt something loosen in my chest. I wasn't completely alone. Maybe I never had been. Maybe there were others who saw the truth but hadn't felt safe enough to speak it yet. That evening, after Emma was in bed, I received a friend request on social media from someone I didn't recognize at first. The profile picture was small, and the name, Valerie Hutchins, didn't immediately ring any bells. But when I clicked on it and saw the mutual friends we shared, several people from my hometown, I realized she must be local. Curious, I accepted the request. Within minutes, a message appeared. Hi Rachel. You don't know me, but I'm friends with several people in your family. I saw everything that happened with your sister, and I wanted to reach out because something similar happened to me years ago. Would you be open to talking? I stared at the message, debating whether to respond. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to avoid dredging up everything again with a stranger. But another part of me, the part that had felt so isolated and misunderstood, was desperate for connection with anyone who might truly understand. I'm open to talking, I typed back. Her response came quickly, and we ended up messaging back and forth for over an hour. Valerie told me her story, about how her mother-in-law had pierced her daughter's ears at 6 months old without permission while babysitting, claiming it was a cultural tradition and that Valerie was being oversensitive by being upset. When Valerie had set boundaries and refused to leave her daughter alone with her mother-in-law anymore, her husband's entire family had turned on her, calling her controlling and accusing her of trying to keep the baby from them. It ended up causing huge problems in my marriage, Valerie wrote. My husband kept saying I should just let it go, that it was done and couldn't be undone. But I couldn't get past the violation, you know? It wasn't about the earrings. It was about them thinking they had more rights to my daughter's body than she did. I know exactly what you mean, I replied, my fingers flying over the keyboard. Everyone keeps saying it's just hair, it'll grow back. But that's not the point. The point is my sister ignored my daughter's boundaries and everyone expects me to pretend it doesn't matter. Valerie sent back a long message about how she'd eventually divorced her husband, not because of the earring incident itself but because of what it revealed about his inability to prioritize their daughter's well-being over family peace. She'd rebuilt her life, found a support system of other mothers who'd experienced similar violations, and now she ran a private online group for parents dealing with boundary issues with extended family. Would you like me to add you to the group? She asked. It's private and heavily moderated. Just a place where people can talk about this stuff without being judged or told they're overreacting. I hesitated only briefly before saying yes. Within an hour, I was scrolling through post after post from mothers and some fathers sharing stories that ranged from upsetting to absolutely enraging. Grandparents who'd fed children allergens after being explicitly told not to. Aunts who'd taken children for haircuts or ear piercings without permission. Family members who'd posted photos of children on social media despite clear requests not to. And in every case, the pattern was the same: the violated boundary, the defensive reaction, the family pressure to just get over it and stop causing drama. Reading these stories, I felt a strange mixture of validation and sadness. Validation because I wasn't alone, wasn't crazy, wasn't overreacting. Sadness because this pattern was so common, so deeply embedded in family dynamics that dozens, maybe hundreds, of parents were dealing with versions of the same conflict I was navigating. I spent that night reading through the group, occasionally commenting with support or sharing my own experience. Several people responded to my story with outrage on my behalf, expressing disbelief that my family was defending Claire's actions. One woman wrote, "A 5-year-old said no and your sister did it anyway. In any other context, we'd call that assault. Why is it suddenly okay because it's family?" The question haunted me as I finally closed my laptop and got ready for bed. Why was it okay? Why were family members given a pass for behavior that would be completely unacceptable from strangers? And why were the people who dared to set boundaries the ones labeled as dramatic, unforgiving, family destroyers? The next few weeks brought subtle shifts. Jen started texting me occasionally, nothing heavy, just checking in or sharing funny memes. We met for coffee once while Emma was at school, sitting in a corner booth at a local cafe and talking carefully around the minefield of family drama. She told me that Marcus was starting to soften slightly, not admitting he was wrong but at least acknowledging that maybe there was more to the situation than he'd initially understood. "Your mom mentioned the other day that she misses Emma," Jen said quietly, stirring sugar into her coffee. "She didn't say she misses you," which I thought was telling. But she asked how Emma was doing, if her hair had grown out any. I felt a complicated tangle of emotions at that. Part of me wanted to reach out to my mother, to rebuild some kind of bridge. But a larger part of me knew that nothing had really changed. My mother missed Emma, but she still didn't seem to understand why what happened was wrong. She was sad about the consequences but not willing to address the cause. "Has Claire said anything?" I asked, not sure I wanted to know the answer. Jen shook her head. "She's still posting about being victimized by her sister. Still getting sympathy from people who don't know the full story. I don't think she's capable of seeing herself as anything other than the injured party." I nodded, unsurprised. That had always been Claire's pattern. She was the sun around which everyone else orbited, and when people stopped orbiting, it was because they were broken or cruel, never because she'd pushed them away. Halloween approached, and Emma asked if we could go trick-or-treating at Grandma's neighborhood like we'd done the previous year. I had to explain, as gently as possible, that we wouldn't be doing that this year, that we'd stay in our own neighborhood instead. She accepted this with the easy adaptability of childhood, but I saw the question in her eyes, the slowly forming awareness that something had fundamentally changed in her world. We carved pumpkins together on the front porch, Emma giggling as she pulled out handfuls of slimy seeds while I carefully cut the face she'd drawn. A few neighbors stopped by to chat, complimenting Emma's costume, a sparkly witch with a purple hat, and I felt grateful for these small, uncomplicated interactions. This was our community now, not the family that had turned their backs when I needed them most. On Halloween night, as we walked the neighborhood collecting candy, Emma slipped her hand into mine and looked up at me with serious eyes. "Mommy, are we still a family? Just me and you?" The question caught me off guard, piercing through all my carefully constructed defenses. I knelt down on the sidewalk, not caring that other trick-or-treaters had to walk around us. "We are absolutely still a family, baby. We're just a smaller family right now. But that doesn't make us any less real or important." She nodded, processing this. "I like our small family." "Me too, sweetheart." "Me too." As November arrived, bringing with it the looming specter of Thanksgiving, I received an email from my mother. It was formal, carefully worded, clearly written and rewritten multiple times before being sent. She was hosting Thanksgiving as always, and she wanted me to know that I was invited, that Emma was invited, and that she hoped we could put aside our differences for one day to celebrate as a family. The email didn't mention Claire. Didn't address what had happened or acknowledge any wrongdoing. It simply expressed a desire to move forward, to heal the rift by pretending it had never existed. I read the email 3 times, feeling the pull of old patterns, old obligations. Part of me wanted to say yes, to show up with a pie and a smile and slip back into my role as the accommodating daughter. It would be easier. It would make everyone happy, everyone except me and Emma. I thought about it for 2 days, weighing the costs and benefits, imagining various scenarios. What would happen if we went? Would Claire be there, still unrepentant, still expecting me to apologize? Would Emma be uncomfortable, confused by the tension in the room? Would I be able to sit at that table and pretend everything was fine while my daughter's trauma was still being dismissed and minimized? In the end, the answer was clear. I wrote back a polite but firm response. Thank you for the invitation. Unfortunately, we won't be able to attend. I hope you have a lovely Thanksgiving. I didn't explain. Didn't justify. Didn't leave room for negotiation. I simply declined and then closed my email before I could see her response. Emma and I would have our own Thanksgiving, just the 2 of us. We'd make a small turkey, maybe invite Jen and her family if she was willing to risk Marcus's anger. We'd start our own traditions, build our own memories, create a holiday that wasn't weighted down by unspoken resentments and forced civility. That evening, as I tucked Emma into bed, she asked me a question that showed how much she was absorbing even when I thought she wasn't paying attention. Mommy, when people do mean things to you, do you have to forgive them? I sat on the edge of her bed, choosing my words carefully. Forgiveness is complicated, sweetheart. Sometimes people deserve forgiveness when they're genuinely sorry and they change their behavior. But you never have to let someone keep hurting you just because they're family. Your feelings matter, and protecting yourself matters. She thought about this, her small face serious in the glow of her nightlight. Aunt Claire hurt me. I know she did, baby. I don't want to see her again. The words were simple, direct, delivered with the clarity that only children possess. And in that moment, I knew we were on the right path. Emma wasn't confused about what had happened. She wasn't wrestling with whether her feelings were valid. She knew, with absolute certainty, that she'd been violated and that the person who'd violated her hadn't earned her forgiveness or her presence. That's okay, I told her, kissing her forehead. You don't have to see anyone who makes you feel unsafe. That's your choice to make. She smiled, a small, relieved smile, and snuggled deeper into her blankets. I love you, Mommy. I love you too, sweet girl. More than anything. As I closed her door and stood in the hallway, I felt something settle inside me, a deep sense of rightness that had been missing for weeks. We were building something new here, Emma and I, something based on respect and boundaries and the radical idea that children's feelings mattered as much as adults' comfort. It wasn't the family I'd been born into. But maybe, just maybe, it was the family we needed to become. Winter settled over Maplewood with the kind of quiet determination that transformed everything slowly. The trees stood bare against gray skies, their branches like skeletal fingers reaching upward. Christmas lights began appearing on houses throughout the neighborhood, twinkling defiance against the early darkness that swallowed each afternoon. Emma turned 6 in December, and this time her birthday was deliberately small, just the 2 of us and 3 of her closest friends from school, making cookies and watching movies in our living room. No family. No tension. No worry about who might cross what boundary. Just children laughing and frosting sugar cookies with alarming amounts of sprinkles while I supervised from the kitchen, feeling lighter than I had in months. Emma's hair had grown out somewhat, though it would be years before it reached the length she'd once had. She'd stopped mentioning it as much, adapting to her reflection in the mirror with the resilience Dr. Chin kept assuring me was normal for her age. Sometimes I caught her running her fingers through the shorter strands, a distant look in her eyes, and I knew she was remembering. But she was also learning something crucial, that she had agency over her own body, that her boundaries would be respected in our home even when they hadn't been elsewhere. The holiday season brought its own challenges. Invitations arrived, cards from relatives with notes asking us to reconsider, to come to Christmas dinner, to let bygones be bygones. My mother called twice, leaving voicemails that started stern and ended pleading. Your father wants to see Emma. This has gone on long enough, Rachel. It's Christmas. Family should be together at Christmas. But family, I'd learned, was more than shared blood and holiday traditions. Family was respect and safety and the willingness to acknowledge harm when it occurred. My biological family had failed that test spectacularly, choosing comfort over accountability, and I'd built something different in the wreckage they'd left behind. Jen and I had grown closer, meeting for coffee every few weeks, texting regularly about nothing and everything. She'd become an unexpected ally, someone who understood the complexity of loving people who'd hurt you while also recognizing you couldn't sacrifice yourself to maintain those relationships. Marcus still wasn't speaking to me, but Jen reported that he'd stopped actively defending Claire, which felt like progress even if it wasn't reconciliation. Through Valerie's online group, I'd connected with other mothers navigating similar situations. We'd formed a smaller subgroup that met virtually every Monday evening after our kids were in bed, sharing stories and strategies over video chat. These women, scattered across the country, had become a lifeline. They understood in ways my biological family never had, that protecting your child sometimes meant losing everything else, and that the losing didn't make you wrong. One particularly cold evening in mid-December, I was washing dishes while Emma played in the living room when my phone rang. Unknown number, local area code. I almost didn't answer, assuming it was another well-meaning relative calling to lecture me about forgiveness. But something made me pick up. Hello? There was a pause, then a voice I hadn't heard in months. Rachel. It's Claire. My hand tightened around the phone. I said nothing, waiting. I know you probably don't want to talk to me. And I get it, I really do. But I've been doing a lot of thinking, and I wanted to. She paused, and I heard her take a shaky breath. I wanted to apologize. Really apologize. Not the non-apology I gave before. I messed up. I hurt Emma, and I hurt you, and I've spent months trying to justify it when there's no justification for what I did. I leaned against the kitchen counter, my heart pounding. The words sounded sincere, but I'd heard Claire sound sincere before. She was good at performing emotion when it served her purposes. What changed? I asked quietly. Claire laughed, a bitter sound. I started seeing a therapist. Not because I thought I needed one, but because Mom kept saying maybe I should talk to someone about why you were being so difficult. And the therapist, she didn't tell me what I wanted to hear. She kept asking me questions about boundaries and consent and what I thought gave me the right to make decisions about someone else's body. And I kept getting defensive, kept explaining that it was just hair, that I was trying to help. And finally she asked me how I'd feel if someone did that to me without asking. I waited, not trusting myself to speak. And I realized I'd be furious, Claire continued. If someone cut my hair without permission, I'd lose it. I'd probably never speak to them again. But I expected you and Emma to just accept it because it was me, because I'm family, because I didn't mean any harm. But impact matters more than intent. That's what my therapist keeps saying. And the impact of what I did was that I violated a 5-year-old child who trusted me. I traumatized her. And then I got mad at you for protecting her from me. The kitchen had gone very quiet. I could hear Emma singing softly to herself in the other room, some song she'd learned at school. Outside, snow had begun to fall, soft flakes drifting past the window. I don't know what to say, I admitted. You don't have to say anything, Claire replied. I'm not calling because I expect you to forgive me or let me back in your life. I'm calling because you and Emma deserve an actual apology, not the garbage I tried to pass off as one before. What I did was wrong. It doesn't matter that I thought I was helping or that I didn't understand why it was such a big deal. I hurt your daughter, and I spent months making myself the victim instead of taking responsibility. I'm sorry. Truly, deeply sorry. I closed my eyes, feeling tears slip down my cheeks. Thank you for saying that. I've written a letter to Emma too, if you're willing to give it to her. Not trying to excuse what I did, just apologizing and acknowledging that I hurt her. My therapist helped me write it in age-appropriate language. But I understand if you don't want to give it to her. That's completely your call. Send it to me first, I said. Let me read it, and I'll decide if it's appropriate for her to see. Fair enough. Claire paused. I've also talked to Mom and Dad. Told them that you were right, that I was wrong, that they need to stop pressuring you to pretend nothing happened. I don't know if it'll make a difference, but I wanted you to know I tried. We talked for a few more minutes, carefully navigating the minefield of our shared history. Claire told me she was working on her boundary issues, recognizing patterns from childhood where she'd been praised for being spontaneous and fun while I'd been criticized for being uptight and controlling. She acknowledged that our parents had enabled her behavior for years, always expecting me to accommodate her because that was easier than holding her accountable. By the time we hung up, I felt emotionally wrung out, but also something else. Not forgiveness, not yet, maybe not ever in the way people expected. But a glimmer of possibility that maybe, eventually, we could find some new kind of relationship built on actual respect rather than habitual family dynamics. The letter arrived 3 days later, a handwritten note in an envelope addressed to Emma. I read it twice before deciding to share it with Emma. Claire had kept it simple and honest, explaining that she'd made a very bad choice at the birthday party, that she'd hurt Emma and hadn't listened when Emma said no, and that she was truly sorry. She didn't make excuses or try to minimize what she'd done. She simply took responsibility and apologized. I sat down with Emma after school, the letter in my hands. Sweetheart, Aunt Claire sent you a letter. It's an apology for what she did at your birthday party. Would you like me to read it to you? Emma looked at the envelope with wary eyes. Is she going to say it was a joke again? No, baby. This is a real apology. She says she was wrong and she's sorry she hurt you. Emma considered this, then nodded slowly. Okay. You can read it. I read the letter aloud, watching Emma's face carefully for any signs of distress. When I finished, she sat quietly for a moment, processing. Then she asked, Does this mean we have to see her again? Not if you don't want to, I assured her. An apology doesn't mean everything goes back to the way it was. It just means she's trying to do better. But whether we spend time with her again is something we can decide together, and only if you feel ready. I don't feel ready, Emma said firmly. That's perfectly okay. Maybe someday you will, or maybe you won't. Either way is fine. Emma nodded, satisfied with this answer. She went back to coloring, and I tucked the letter away in a drawer, unsure if it would ever be revisited but glad it existed nonetheless. Christmas came and went quietly. Emma and I decorated a small tree together, hung stockings above the fireplace, made hot chocolate with excessive marshmallows. Jen and her family came over for Christmas Eve dinner, and it felt easy and warm in a way family gatherings never had before. Marcus hadn't come, he was spending the holiday with his parents, but the twins had grown attached to Emma over our recent visits, and the house filled with the sound of children playing while the adults talked and laughed over wine and pie. On Christmas morning, Emma woke me at dawn, bouncing with excitement over the modest pile of presents under the tree. We opened gifts in our pajamas, wrapping paper scattered across the living room floor, and I felt a contentment that had nothing to do with expensive presents or elaborate celebrations. It was just the two of us, building traditions that were ours alone, and it was enough. January brought a thaw, both meteorological and familial. My mother called on a Tuesday afternoon, her voice tentative in a way I'd never heard before. Rachel, I've been talking with Claire. She told me what she said to you, about taking responsibility. And I've been thinking a lot about my role in all of this. I waited, phone pressed to my ear, afraid to hope. I spent your whole childhood excusing Claire's behavior, my mother continued slowly. Telling you to be patient with her, to understand that she didn't mean any harm, to let things go. And I did it because it was easier than confronting her, than admitting that maybe I'd raised her to think her wants mattered more than other people's boundaries. I enabled her, Rachel. And in doing that, I taught you that your feelings didn't matter as much as keeping the peace. Mom, I started, but she kept talking. I don't expect you to forgive me right away. I don't even know if I've earned the right to ask for forgiveness. But I want you to know that I see it now. I see how I failed you, how I failed Emma. And I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. We talked for an hour, the longest honest conversation we'd had in years. She told me about her own mother, about patterns that had been passed down through generations, about women who'd been taught to smooth things over and accommodate and never make waves. She didn't make excuses, but she provided context, and somehow that helped. Can I see Emma? My mother asked finally. I know I don't deserve it, but I miss her terribly. And I want to be better, to do better. I want her to have a grandmother who respects her boundaries and teaches her that her voice matters. Let me talk to Emma, I said. See how she feels about it. But Mom, if we do this, things have to be different. I need to know that you'll support me when I set boundaries, even if it's uncomfortable. Especially if it's uncomfortable. I understand, my mother said. And I promise I'll try. We started slowly, carefully. A short lunch at a neutral restaurant, just my mother and Emma and me. Emma was hesitant at first, sitting close to me and answering questions with single syllables. But my mother was patient, genuinely interested in Emma's answers rather than performing the role of doting grandmother. She asked Emma about school, about her friends, about what books she was reading. And most importantly, she respected Emma's physical boundaries, not demanding hugs or forcing closeness when Emma clearly wasn't ready. By the end of lunch, Emma had relaxed enough to tell my mother about a project she was doing in class, her words tumbling out with growing confidence. And my mother listened, really listened, in a way she'd rarely done when I was a child. Afterward, as we walked to our cars, my mother pulled me aside. Thank you for giving me a chance. I won't waste it. I nodded, still cautious but willing to hope. We're taking it one step at a time. That's all I can ask for. February arrived with unseasonably warm weather, fall spring that made everyone shed their heavy coats prematurely. Emma's 7th birthday approached, and this time, when we planned the party, I didn't feel the familiar knot of anxiety about who might show up and what might go wrong. We were inviting school friends, Jen and her family, and my mother, who'd asked if she could come and accepted gracefully when I said we'd think about it. The decision ultimately came from Emma. She'd been slowly rebuilding her relationship with her grandmother through short, structured visits, and one evening she asked if Grandma could come to the party. Not Grandpa or Uncle Marcus or anyone else, just Grandma. I think that would be nice, I told her. Should we invite her? Emma nodded. But not Aunt Claire. The boundary was clear and firm, delivered without guilt or uncertainty. My daughter knew what she needed to feel safe, and she wasn't afraid to say it. The party was joyful and uncomplicated. Emma wore a dress she'd picked out herself, purple with butterflies embroidered on the hem. Her hair had grown to shoulder length, still shorter than before but her own choice now. She'd told me a few weeks ago that she liked it this length, that it was easier to take care of and it didn't get tangled when she played. My mother arrived with a thoughtful gift, a craft kit Emma had mentioned wanting, and she helped set up decorations without trying to take over or criticize my choices. When it came time to sing Happy Birthday, Emma beamed at her grandmother with genuine affection, and I felt something old and wounded inside me begin to heal. Claire remained absent from our lives, though she continued her therapy and sent occasional updates through my mother. She wasn't pushing for reconciliation, wasn't demanding forgiveness on any timeline but ours. She was simply doing the work of becoming someone who respected boundaries, whether or not that ever led to restored relationship. My father and Marcus were still distant, neither willing to admit they'd been wrong but also not actively hostile anymore. It was an uneasy détente, not quite estrangement but not quite family either. I'd made peace with that ambiguity, understanding that some relationships might never fully heal and that was okay too. Spring came in earnest, bringing cherry blossoms and daffodils and light that lingered longer each evening. Emma and I planted a small garden in the backyard, tomatoes and herbs and a wildflower patch that attracted butterflies. We sat on the back porch in the evenings, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of pink and gold, and talked about everything and nothing. One evening, as we pulled weeds from around the tomato plants, Emma asked me a question that showed how much she'd grown. "Mommy, Was it hard to tell Aunt Claire she couldn't come to my party? I sat back on my heels, considering. It was hard at first, I admitted. Because I'd spent my whole life trying to keep everyone happy, even when it meant I wasn't happy. But it got easier when I remembered that my job is to keep you safe and teach you that your feelings matter. That's more important than keeping the peace. Emma nodded thoughtfully, dirt smudged on her cheek. I'm glad you told her no. Me too, baby. Me too. As summer approached, bringing with it the promise of long days and simple pleasures, I looked back on the past year and marveled at how much had changed. I'd lost relationships I thought were permanent, discovered strength I didn't know I possessed, and built a life that was smaller but infinitely richer than what I'd had before. Emma thrived in ways both big and small. She was more confident, more willing to speak up when something bothered her, more secure in the knowledge that her voice mattered. She'd made close friends at school, children who valued her kindness and creativity. And she had a mother who would always choose her well-being over family politics. The haircut that had started everything had grown out, transformed into something Emma had chosen for herself. And that felt symbolic somehow, that even violations could become opportunities for reclaiming agency, for deciding who you wanted to be rather than letting others define you. I thought about writing Claire, about sharing some of these reflections, but decided against it. Some things needed to be lived rather than explained. If Claire was genuinely changing, she'd understand that repair was a slow process, that forgiveness couldn't be rushed or demanded. And if she wasn't, well, Emma and I were better off without her anyway. On a warm June evening, Emma and I sat on the porch swing, watching fireflies emerge in the deepening twilight. She leaned against me, her head on my shoulder, and I wrapped my arm around her. "Mommy," she said sleepily. "I like our family. Just the way it is." I kissed the top of her head, breathing in the scent of her shampoo and the faint smell of grass from her afternoon playing outside. "Me too, sweet girl. Me too." And sitting there with my daughter safe in my arms, I realized something profound. I'd thought family meant blood and obligation and tolerating harm for the sake of connection. But real family, the kind that mattered, was built on respect and safety and the courage to protect what was precious, even when it cost you everything else. Sometimes love meant walking away. Sometimes strength looked like saying no. And sometimes the greatest gift you could give your child was showing them that their boundaries mattered more than other people's comfort. Emma dozed off against me as the stars emerged one by one overhead. I held her close, listening to the gentle rhythm of her breathing, and felt at peace with the choices I'd made. We'd lost some people along the way, people who'd chosen convenience over accountability. But we'd found ourselves, and we'd found others who understood that real family protects rather than violates, supports rather than diminishes, chooses truth over comfortable lies. That night, after carrying Emma inside and tucking her into bed, I stood in her doorway watching her sleep. Her short hair fanned across the pillow, her face peaceful and untroubled. She was resilient and strong and valued, not in spite of the boundaries we'd set but because of them. I'd thought standing up for her would cost me everything. And in some ways it had. But what I'd gained, a relationship built on mutual respect and unconditional protection, was worth infinitely more than what I'd lost. Some storms you survive by running toward shelter. But sometimes, the only way through is to stand firm in your truth and let the storm rage itself out around you. And when the sky finally clears, you find that what remains is stronger, truer, and more yours than anything that came before. That's what I wanted Emma to remember when she looked back on this chapter of our lives. Not the pain or the loss, but the moment her mother chose her, completely and without reservation. The moment we both learned that being loved meant being protected, and that real family didn't ask you to sacrifice your well-being for their peace. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.